Your grandfather could fix anything on his farm. Not almost anything, anything. Engine seized, he fixed it. Transmission slipping, he fixed it. Hydraulics failing, he fixed it. Alone in his barn on a Saturday. You cannot do that. Not because you're less capable, not because you don't want to, but because the equipment you're farming with was deliberately designed so that you can't. Your grandfather's tools are hanging in the barn. His wrenches, his manuals, his knowledge. None of it works on what you're driving today. The connection between the farmer and his machine was broken deliberately. Over 20 years, in 3 stages. In 1975, the average American farmer could perform 80% of all maintenance and repairs on his own equipment, with his own tools, in his own shop, without calling anyone. Wow, without waiting for a dealer, without paying a diagnostic fee to be told what he already knew. Today, the average American farmer can perform less than 20% of maintenance and repairs on his own equipment. Not because his hands changed, not because his mind changed, because the equipment changed. In ways that were not accidental. If old iron runs in your blood, subscribe to Classic Farm Iron. Fellow farmers are watching right now. 3 changes took repair from the farmer's hands and put it behind a locked door. Complexity, proprietary software, economic pressure. Yet each one felt like progress when it arrived. Each one reduced the farmer's ability to maintain what he owned. Together, they created a farmer who owns his equipment but cannot repair it, who bought the machine but doesn't control it, who paid $300,000 for something he needs permission to fix. With that complexity first, your grandfather's tractor had an engine he could understand completely by looking at it. Carburetor, distributor, points and condenser, mechanical injection pump, every component visible, every function logical, every repair possible with the tools on his workbench. Well, he bought a service manual for $2 from the dealer. It showed him every component, every torque specification, every clearance measurement, every procedure in plain language with clear diagrams. He could read it at the kitchen table on Sunday and fix the problem Monday morning before the dew was off the field. The knowledge required was mechanical knowledge. Was how things fit together, how forces move through systems, how wear presents itself in metal and rubber and steel. This knowledge could be learned, it could be taught, it could be passed from father to son standing beside the machine with tools in both hands. Yeah, your grandfather taught your father to read an engine the way a doctor reads a patient. Listen to it, feel the vibration, smell what's burning, look at what the oil says about what's happening inside. Diagnostic knowledge built over decades of working on the same types of machines. Knowledge that lived in the hands as much as the mind. Although muscle memory developed through repetition of the same repairs on the same designs year after year. Your grandfather overhauled his tractor engine 3 times in 40 years. By the 3rd time, he could do it mostly from memory. He knew every bolt, every clearance, every trick that the manual didn't mention, but experience had taught. But modern equipment complexity didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived gradually. Each generation of equipment adding systems that previous generations hadn't needed to understand. Electronic fuel injection in the 1980s. Turbochargers becoming standard through the 1990s. Electronic hydraulic controls. Our tier emission systems requiring precise calibration. GPS guidance integration. CAN bus communication networks connecting every system on the machine through a digital language that a wrench cannot speak. Each addition was a genuine improvement in performance. Engines that burn cleaner, fuel systems that use less, controls that were more precise. The technology worked. The problem wasn't that the technology was bad. The problem was that each improvement required a different kind of knowledge to maintain it. Knowledge that didn't transfer from a wrench to a laptop, the way knowledge had transferred from father to son beside the old engine. Proprietary software second. Your grandfather's engine had no software. It had no controller, no electronic control module, no firmware that required a dealer's authorization to update or override. When something was wrong with his engine, the problem existed in physical reality. Metal touching metal where it shouldn't, seal leaking, bearing worn, valve clearance drifted. Wow, he could find the progress with his hands and his eyes and his decades of experience. He could fix it with the tools on his workbench. Nobody needed to give him permission. John Deere began embedding proprietary software in its equipment in the 1990s. By 2010, a John Deere tractor contained more lines of software code than a Boeing 787. The software was protected by end-user license agreements that farmers signed without fully understanding what they were signing. The agreement said one thing clearly: you own the machine. You do not own the software that makes it run. When the software detects a fault, it locks the machine. Not because the machine cannot physically run, but because the software has decided it should not. The decision to stop or allow your tractor to work no longer lives in the physical reality of the machine. It lives in code you cannot read, on a server you cannot access, controlled by a company 47 miles away that will not give you the password. In 2017, a Nebraska farmer had his combine break down during harvest. The combine had a software fault. The machine was physically capable of running. The dealer was 3 days away. The crop was ready. 3 days of delay in a 10-day harvest window cost him significantly. Not because the machine was broken, but because the software said it was. Your grandfather had no software between him and his machine. You have a license agreement, a dealer network, a proprietary diagnostic tool that costs $10,000, and a company's decision about whether you may fix what you own. The right to repair movement emerged from this reality. But to farmers in Nebraska, Iowa, Colorado, and dozens of other states attempted to pass legislation requiring manufacturers to provide farmers with the same diagnostic tools and software access that dealers have. John Deere lobbied against every one of these bills. The argument was consistent. Allowing farmers access to their own equipment's software would compromise emissions compliance, safety systems, and intellectual property. The argument that a farmer might need to fix his own combine during a 3-day harvest window was acknowledged and dismissed. In 2023, John Deere signed a memorandum with the American Farm Bureau promising to provide greater repair access to farmers. The memorandum was not legally binding. It was not a law. It was a promise. And promises from the company that designed the lock are worth exactly what you'd expect. Economic pressure third. Your grandfather fixed his equipment because it was the only rational choice. The alternative, by calling a dealer and waiting for a mechanic, would cost time and money that farming in 1965 didn't have to spare. The economics made self-repair the obvious answer. So he learned, deeply, out of necessity. As dealer networks consolidated and as equipment complexity made self-repair harder, the economics shifted. A farmer who attempted a complex repair on modern equipment and made an error could void his warranty, trigger a software lockout, or damage a component that cost more to replace than the original repair would have cost at the dealer. The rational economic choice gradually became calling the dealer. And once calling the dealer became the rational choice, the motivation to develop repair skills disappeared. Why learn to rebuild a hydraulic pump if attempting the rebuild risks a more expensive outcome than the dealer visit? The knowledge died quietly in 2 generations. Your grandfather's generation had the knowledge and the equipment to use it. Your father's generation had the knowledge but equipment that made it increasingly difficult to apply. Whilst your generation inherited neither the knowledge nor equipment that knowledge could fix. The chain of transmission broke somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd generation. Not because anyone decided to stop teaching, because the equipment that the teaching was about was replaced by equipment that teaching couldn't reach. Your grandfather tried to teach your father everything he knew. Your father learned it and watched it become less applicable every year. By the time you were old enough to stand beside the machine and learn, the machine had software your grandfather never heard of and your father couldn't explain. Some farmers refused to let it go. Old iron, the collectors, the preservers, left the farmers who kept the 1968 International running beside the modern fleet because the 1968 International is something they can still understand. Not as nostalgia, as function, as a machine that responds to mechanical knowledge rather than software authorization. A machine where the relationship between farmer and equipment is still direct. Still personal, still governed by what you know and what your hands can do. There are farmers today who run vintage equipment for exactly this reason. Not because old tractors are more efficient, because old tractors are still theirs in a way new tractors are not. The knowledge required to maintain them can still be learned, still be taught. Don't still be passed the way your grandfather passed it, standing beside the machine with tools in both hands and the manual open on the workbench. Your grandfather stood in his barn on Saturday with his hands in an engine he understood completely. The knowledge in his hands was accumulated over 30 years of fixing the same types of machines. But that knowledge was his. Nobody licensed it. Nobody could take it. Nobody could lock him out of his own equipment because his equipment had no lock. You stand in the same barn beside a machine worth $300,000 that will not let you change the software parameters that are preventing it from starting. Bet the dealer is 47 miles away. The harvest window is 10 days. The diagnostic tool costs $10,000 and only works if the manufacturer approves your access. Your grandfather's tools are on the workbench behind you. They won't help. Not because the tools are wrong, because the problem isn't in the engine anymore. It's in the code, and the code isn't yours. What could your grandfather fix that you cannot? Do you remember watching him work on equipment? Did he try to teach you what he knew? Did you ever stand beside him in the shop and watch those hands find a problem that a computer would have missed? But did you learn any of it before the equipment changed and the knowledge stopped applying? Is there anything left on your operation you can still fix yourself? Or has it all moved behind a diagnostic port in a dealer's authorization? Tell us below. Because the farmers who remember standing in the shop on a Saturday morning, watching knowledge pass from one generation to the next, understand something about a software lockout during harvest that no John Deere licensing agreement will ever fully explain. And we share this with the farmer who still has his grandfather's tools on the workbench and a tractor in the field those tools cannot touch.